Hello, this is Coach Wilson, and this is Unit 11, Day 9. Today's journal, I'd like for you to talk about what was the Bay of Pigs? How did this event and others lead to a threat against America? I'd like for you to explain this in 4 to 5 sentences. Now, today we're going to be talking about the end of Kennedy's presidency and the beginning of Lyndon B. Johnson's. Now, how did JFK attempt to avoid nuclear war? We've been talking about that and also talking about his domestic programs. We're really going to also look at how did LBJ attempt to deal with some of these domestic programs, as well as what his approach to the rest of Kennedy's presidency was. Now, Kennedy was assassinated on November 22nd, 1963. He was riding in an open-top car during a parade in Dallas. He had really become tough on civil rights and poverty issues, had also signed an order to recall military advisors in Vietnam. There's a lot of conspiracy around Kennedy's assassination. Lee Harvey Oswald was arrested for shooting Kennedy, but then he was murdered by Jack Ruby before he could be questioned. And you can go look deeper into this. There's a lot of really interesting things, from the fact that they think there was another gunman and I don't advise this, but you can see the assassination video on YouTube. They've actually released that. The government has. But it's a very, very graphic video, so please do not go watch it unless you are prepared to see what you're going to see. But here's a picture of Kennedy and Jackie before it happened. And it's really disappointing. Kennedy was a good president. Here is right after Kennedy had been shot. You can see Jackie reaching to grab what can only be thought of as a piece of Kennedy's head on the back of the car, which is pretty rough. But this is the grassy knoll that they talk about, and that is where they think there was a second gunman. But Kennedy was pretty much dead the minute they shot him. As far as the actual where the shot came from, this right here is where they believe the shot came from. If you look at how he was shot and where he was shot at, it doesn't really fully make sense. But essentially, they think right here in this parking lot is where the other gunman possibly is like right behind this fence or in this area. But anyways, there's a lot to it, and but here's a picture of Lee Harvey Oswald getting shot by Jack Ruby. Here is Lee Harvey Oswald, and like I said, there's a lot of conspiracy. The lone gunman theory, the fact there was a magic bullet that would have had to have traveled through his body and out through his back in order of. There's a lot of things. Like I said, we don't. That's not something we need to really get into. The Warren Commission was taken up basically to investigate the event and pronounced that Oswald was a lone gunman. However, there are many who would tell you that is not the case. Now, here's a picture of LBJ and Jackie Kennedy. LBJ was sworn in on the plane headed to the White House to become the President of the United States. And Lyndon B. Johnson, one of the great things that I will say about him as a man and as a president is coming from being Kennedy's VP, he tried to keep doing what Kennedy was doing. You see him there meeting with Martin Luther King. He's going to try to continue promoting civil rights. He's going to try to continue the policies of Kennedy. Now, one of the things that would characterize the end of Kennedy's presidency, and specifically LBJ's, is the Great Society. And that's what their domestic policies were known as. Elected in 1964, Kennedy had chosen me, and it was my duty to carry on his programs. That's what LBJ had to say after the assassination. During this time, there was a huge war going on poverty. A book written called The Other America by Harrington was written in 1962, advocating for a war on poverty. There also was the creation of Job Corps, which provided work training programs for unemployed people. VISTA, which was a domestic peace corps to help the poor areas of our country. Tax Reduction Act, and then social initiatives under the Great Society. Okay, all these things were trying to promote our society getting back to being a quote-unquote great society. Now, during this time, there were also elementary and secondary education acts passed and said that the government would aid public schools. They also started a Head Start program, where preschool program for low-income parents prepare underprivileged kids for school. And so, those parents who are having to work, 6 days a week and can't be there with their children, this program would help them at a very young age to keep up with other kids. or give kids who are maybe in low income situations a chance to succeed. Now, in 1964, the Food Stamp Act was passed. Obviously, that's something that still goes on today. And in 1965, the Social Security Act was passed, which is something that is a very hot item today. There's a big fear that Social Security is going to run out. Medicare health care for people over the age of 65 was invented during this time, or the idea of it was passed. Truman had first proposed this, but it was shot down. And all these kind of build from Roosevelt's presidency. If you go back and look at some of his policies during the end of the Great Depression, kind of there when he's right before World War II, a lot of those policies kind of influence the policies of the Great Society. But Medicaid was also passed, which is free health care for low-income Americans. Medicaid is something that is still offered today. It helps elderly people and those who have retired who don't have a lot of income to pay for insurance. In 1957, there had been a Civil Rights Act passed, and this was passed in order to protect African Americans and their right to vote. Investigated the allegations that registration was being denied in other areas of the country, that African Americans were being denied their right to vote. In 1964, they gave government power to prevent racial discrimination from employers, made segregation illegal in most public places, and sped up school desegregation. So the middle of the 1960s was a very hot time for social justice issues. You've got a war going on in Vietnam, which we haven't really talked about yet. There's just a lot going on. Then you also have the Voting Rights Act of 1965, which authorized the Attorney General to send federal examiners to register voters, and suspended literacy tests and other devices used to harass black voters. Basically, they got rid of things that were holding back African American people, that were designed specifically against African American people in voting and in the things that the government could control. They tried to control with segregation and things of that nature. Now, some other government programs, housing was created during this time, provided subsidies for slum clearing. Congress created the Department of Housing and Urban Development. And what they were trying to do is trying to get to where you didn't have these real bad slums and alleys and places where you had just people on top of each other, but instead you give them, you know, a place to live. You know, maybe it's not a real nice place to live, but it's a place to live. It's a house, and kind of clean up some of these areas that are really rough. You also had the Appalachian Regional Development Act, which targeted highway construction and health centers for the depressed region. So, you know, through the Appalachian area, as well as just throughout the country, they're trying to promote things that can get people working, give people jobs, kind of put some stability in those areas. You also had the Immigration Act of 1965, which abolished the National Origins Act, okay, which went to a quota system with preference given to skills of immigrants, family members, etc. Okay, so we're not going to talk a lot about that, but if you go back, you can look at the National Origin Act. We talked about that a little bit earlier, that we were banning certain groups depending on where they were coming from, either for fear of, you know, communistic reasons or just work reasons, etc. Lady Bird, LBJ's wife, was also very important to his presidency. She helped pass a number of things along and, you know, kind of promote various things. One of those was the Highway Beautification Act, which limited advertising along highways and provided funds for landscaping and rest areas. And that also provides jobs. It also helps our country because it gives, you know, things that we can do. Now, the effects of the Great Society America saw increased opportunities and the improvement on their lives. Spending on Vietnam during this time was 20 times as much as the Great Society. It meant that programs did not reach all aspirations. We're going to talk more about Vietnam and some of those things in a day or so. The war against poverty was shot down on the battlefields of Vietnam is basically how LBJ's presidency is going to end. Now, in some people's eyes, the government was micromanaging, and they didn't need to do that. But regardless of that, that is how it went down. So here are your vocabulary words. Please make sure you're keeping up with these. And if you have any questions, please let me know. If not, I'll talk to you soon.